Hey people, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and wellness coach. Today you're listening to episode 192, and I'm calling it, If You Want to Eat Food That Is Safe, Then Your Vote Matters. Before we get going, I'd like you to know that you can subscribe to my podcast on either iOS or Android much more easily now. If you have an iPhone and want to go straight to iTunes, podcasts on an iTunes network are now called Apple Podcasts. So Apple Podcast has a separate app. It will probably come already installed on the new iPhones, but you can just simply go to the store and download Apple Podcasts. Now, if you've got an iPhone and you're comfortable with the Google search bar, and you have a Google search bar on your iPhone, you can Google Healing Outside the Box in iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Then you'll see Healing Outside the Box by Jean Tiberio on Apple Podcasts. Just click on that and subscribe on the left. Now, if you've got an Android phone, you can now use a new option called Google Podcasts. You just go to the Google Play Store and download the app called, no surprise, Google Podcasts. If you don't want to download a podcast app, you can simply bring up the Google search bar and type in Healing Outside the Box. If you have any questions or problems getting to the subscription button, I'll give you a link to my contact page in the show notes. It's basically healingoutsideTheBox.com/contact us. Now, I was just talking to someone who said, I've been listening to your podcast, Jean. And I was, of course, oh shucks, thanks, I was thinking. Then she went on. Whenever I have trouble sleeping, I just put on your podcast and I fall right to sleep. Which, okay, maybe not always a good thing, but at least she's listening to, Hi, I'm Jean Tiberio, and maybe she'll wake up and without any warning or forethought, she'll say, Gee, I think I would like to cook with a organic zucchini today. Let's see what kind of healthy recipes are in my cookbooks. So there you have it. Oh, just another housekeeping note. I recently discovered a podcast called Plate of the Union, which I'm guessing will be talking about issues related to food and politics. You can Google Plate of the Union on Apple Podcast if you're not already asleep. And remember, iTunes wants you to call it Apple Podcasts. Or you can also go to Google Podcasts if you have an Android. So I was listening to an episode of this Plate of the Union. I believe it was the first episode. There was a quote from an old famous guy. No, I'm going to say really old guy here, because I believe it was the 18th century. And the quote goes something like this. The future of the nations will depend on how they feed themselves. So we have our nations and food in the same sentence. So when I was thinking about doing this episode, I took a look at the Democratic Party platform and the Republican Party platform. And this was from the summer of 2016, because they don't redo their platforms every year. After reading the Republican Party platform, all I have to say is, knock me over with a feather. Yes, indeed. I was considering for this episode reciting every word of the 66-page Republican Party platform, but given the review that I recently received regarding the tendency to put one to sleep, I'm going to just give you the high points. I don't even know how to begin describing the Republican platform, and this is probably not the best place to put a pitchfork in all their lovely ideas, since after all this is a happy-go-lucky podcast about healthy eating and stress reduction. Suffice it to say that the Democrats and Republicans are miles apart when it comes to issues regarding the cost of food, the distribution of food to the poor, and the safety of food. They're miles apart, I say. So it would take a really big caravan to bring the Republicans and Democrats together on this whole thing about the right to eat safe food at a reasonable cost. So we have issues. Issues of subsidies that favor food corporations, issues of advertising soda and candy targeted at children, issues about GMOs or genetically modified foods, and issues about the possible taxation of junk food. While we're on the subject, who's going to pay when 25 million diabetics need to have their toes amputated and then they have a stroke, for God's sake? And FYI, diabetes and obesity are pre-existing conditions that the Republicans state in their platform that they want to admit from what must be covered with health insurance. And while we're on the subject, I should get myself a soapbox if I could only stand on it. While we're on the subject, the medical cost for over 50% of Americans who are either overweight or obese is skyrocketing. Knowing which party protects your food and your health could not be more important right now. So which political party has healthy food as part of their party platform? Well, neither party, as it turns out. But the Democratic Party covers all of the supporting issues that protect Americans from harm, especially when it comes to high-risk foods. It's a bit of an oversimplification to simply say, vote for politicians that promote healthy food. Because what does that mean? What does it look like exactly? Since party platforms aren't written every year, let's take a look at the party platforms from the summer of 2016. Overall, I don't know if anything's really changed. If anything, and I know I'm biased here, Republicans seem to be getting together a working definition of pre-existing conditions, and it may include a lot. I went searching up and down, left and right over the internet, and could find almost nothing this year regarding food and politics, with the exception of that one podcast. The New York Times had an interesting article from 2016, and I'll link it in the show notes for you. But no one this year is talking about food. They're not talking about safe food, affordable food, accessible food, food during droughts, food during war. Nothing. With the possible exception of Tom Colicchio, who's a Democratic congressman from Massachusetts. As one article put it, it's impossible to get any politician to put down his barbecue long enough to consider the national security consequences of, say, our soldiers on the battlefield being so obese that they can no longer run. Issues like that are a distinct possibility if we go to war before we work on this whole food and nutrition business in this country. Lamar Smith, a conservative from Texas, was asked a question about security questions raised by an obese American army. His response was, quote, "I'm going to disappoint you. I don't know anything about that. This barbecue is good, though." End quote. I'm sure the barbecue is very good, since it was Texas. But let's get back to this whole political food fight and look at the two different party platforms with regard to food and nutrition. The New York Times article I mentioned brings up a point that the area where family eating and other concerns like climate change overlap could be a potential breeding ground for new young Democratic voters. There was an article out recently that made a prediction about climate change, and it said that by the year 2040, the Earth might be not so great a place to live. And that's certainly going to have an impact on young adults who want to bring children into this world, or survive 20 years from now in that exact world themselves. Believe it or not, there are now mothers with small children that are buying organic milk at Walmart. These same people are now concerned about pesticides and herbicides and GMOs. In my opinion, the Democrats have an opportunity to encourage these young mothers to get to the polls and cast a vote for their family's health and their food safety. Because if the Democrats continue to wait around for Republicans to bring up farmers markets, small family farms, and GMO labeling, the Democrats are going to be waiting for a long time. There's a few food-related issues that are already in the Democratic platform. It's their job to convince people that it is in everyone's best interest to eat food that won't harm us. Here is a quote from that same New York Times article, and it's from Bob Massey. Quote, "Voters, conservative and liberal, are concerned about the environmental impact of certain industrial agricultural practices and understand the connection between food and health. Large-scale agribusinesses and powerhouse farming organizations, we're talking to you, Monsanto, still hold great sway over agricultural policy, but the degree to which Big Ag lines politicians' pockets has reached the point where they can't be ignored." End quote. I imagine you can guess that Bob Massey is a Democrat. Let's just take GMOs, for example. Here's a question that was posed to both parties. Should food producers be required to label genetically modified foods? Republicans? No. Democrats? Yes. Constitution? Yes. Veterans? Yes. Women's equality voters? Yes. Pretty much everyone else? Yes. I think it's 92% of the population. But again, I couldn't find any article from 2018 regarding food and politics. Here are some things from the Democratic Party platform. Now, the Democratic platform is 34 pages. The top issues include protecting voting rights, combating climate change, that was number 2, provide quality and affordable education, and ensure the health and safety of all Americans. Now let's go into ensure the health and safety of all Americans. Included in that is securing universal health care. What a surprise. Supporting community health centers. Very important. I actually worked at a community health center as a nutritionist for a while. Sustaining the SNAP or food stamp program. And included in that is sustaining WIC and the Healthy Incentives Program, which allows SNAP or food stamp recipients to get free food at farmers markets. I mean, it's really free. You don't even have to use your food stamps. You just say, "I want that," and they give it to you. By the way, you can read the platforms on the internet if you have a few days to spare with nothing better to do. The Republican Party platform is 66 pages long, but skimming it will give you an idea about how different the two parties come down when it comes to safe and healthy food. Now let's talk about the Republican Party platform. Here we go. This is just an example from page 27. Quote, "Overregulation is the quiet tyranny of the nanny state." End quote. Okay. Here's another quote from the Republican platform on healthcare. And yes, I'm pulling out quotes from this, but it's word for word from the platform. Quote, "America's healthcare professionals should not be forced to choose between following their faith and practicing their profession." I'm not sure that was necessary, but there you have it. Here's another direct quote from the Republican platform. Quote, "The FDA needs leadership that can reform the agency for our country and fix the lack of predictability, consistency, transparency, and efficiency at the agency. The FDA needs to return to its traditional emphasis on hard science and approving new breakthrough medicines rather than divert its attention and consume its resources trying to overregulate electronic records or vaping." Yes, vaping is in the Republican Party platform, and I'm guessing they're not in favor of it. Here's another quote from the platform. "After nearly 8 years of a Democratic commander-in-chief who has frequently placed strategic and ideological limitations and shackles on our military, our enemies have been emboldened and our national security is at great risk." End quote. So here the Republican Party, I'm guessing, is saying that Barack Obama, a black man, is putting shackles on our military and intentionally emboldening our enemy. Okay, here's another quote. "Our country faces a national security crisis, and only by electing a Republican to the White House will we restore law and order to our land and safety to our citizens." They go on to mention Benghazi in the platform. But I imagine you're already asleep. I want to mention something else in the platform, though. Here we go. Quote, "We do not support the UN Convention on Women's Rights. We do not support the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We do not support the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities." Ouch. Here's another important part of the platform regarding food. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, should be removed from the Farm Bill and from the administration of the USDA. In other words, the Republicans want to pull nutrition out of the Farm Bill. It also sends the message there that food and farm policies in the United States should not be linked. Removing food for the poor from farming, although maybe not intentional, would be the undoing of the SNAP program. Here's another quote. "The last Farm Bill took far too long to enact, creating instability about farm policy for nearly 2 years. Republicans are dedicated to leading this country forward, which includes getting things done on time, including the next Farm Bill." And this is intriguing, according to the Democrats, because efforts to remove SNAP or food stamps from the Farm Bill is the primary reason that the last Farm Bill was not completed on time. They include a whole paragraph on crop insurance, saying, quote, "Crop insurance is a vital risk management tool for farmers." So they're clearly pro-farmers. Now here's another paragraph about conservation that the Democrats are pointing to. And this point I got out of another article. They're saying that the Republican Party platform refers to the EPA's Waters of the United States rule as a travesty. So now this is me. Just to be clear on this, the Republicans are referring to the notion of keeping the waters of our country drinkable as a travesty. Now, here's the Republican Party platform on GMO labeling. This is from the platform. "Despite bipartisan votes in both the House and Senate to approve mandatory labeling of GMOs, the platform nonetheless stands in opposition to the GMO labeling bill recently passed by Congress." Now remember, this was back in 2016 that the platform was written. Since then, the Republicans actually killed that bill. So now fast forward to 2018. Some guy named Jerry Hagstrom, who I've never heard before, has something to say about this. He's a journalist who has covered political conventions since 1984, so he has some perspective. Basically, Jerry believes that the issues around general health, GMO foods, and food waste issues are going to become issues for voters, especially young voters. And maybe it's time politicians realize that. He says, quote, "Food can be a hunger issue, an immigration issue, an animal welfare issue, a labor issue, an environmental issue, a farming issue, a health issue, or, and this is important too, a trade issue." What ties all of these issues together? Well, in my opinion, they are all moral issues. Do we help feed the poor or don't we? Do we help them feed themselves? Should we insist on healthy organic food irregardless of what the food is going to cost? These are all moral issues. The second thing that is clear, I guess to Jerry and certainly to me, is that no one is paying attention. The quality and quantity of food, the safety of food, the availability, and the subsidizing of food should be important enough to get on the radar of both political platforms. This year, not just 2040. I came across another article written recently, and it's called "Political Issues That Matter the Most Right Now." That was the title. There were 35 issues on this list. Food and nutrition was not on the list at all, not even GMOs or diet-related diseases. There were the usual issues like terrorism, immigration, Social Security, unemployment, abortion, racism, ISIS, gun control, border security, which seems like it should be on immigration, campaign finance reform, minimum wage, religious freedom, vaccines, equal pay, fracking, Iran, which gets its separate issue. But there was nothing about food or the link it has to pretty much nearly all chronic diseases in this country. Some really old guy named Maslow developed a hierarchy of needs. And guess what? Food is right up there as a high hierarchy of physiological needs. Food, water, shelter, etc. So Maslow thought it was important. But if the Republicans don't want to discuss what's happening with food and disease, maybe it is the responsibility of the Democrats to bring it up. We still have 2 years before the next presidential election and, you guessed it, party platform. I encourage you all to vote this year and in 2020 and maybe think about what needs are important to you and your family. If this all sounded like an advertisement for the Democrats, well, guilty as charged. But I like this planet we live on, and I'm not going to Mars anytime soon. So there you have it. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.